All right, good morning. My name is Beth Evanson, and I'm the Region 5 representative for the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, and I have Kathy Papa with me. She's the Region 2 representative. Welcome to our webinar on Georgia's historic preservation resources. Before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will monitor the chat and make sure that questions are answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and posted to DCA's YouTube channel. It may take a week or two for our marketing and communications team to get it posted. Please feel free to share with others in your community that may not have been able to attend. Also, just as an FYI, DCA will be hosting a fall conference this year on October the 24th and 25th in Augusta. We invite you to join us as we take an in-depth look at workforce housing and other innovative topics. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Paige Jennings. Paige is the Certified Local Government Coordinator for the Historic Preservation Division at DCA. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paige.
Thank you so much, Beth. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a lovely day so far. Thank you all for joining us to go over a few of the resources we offer through HPD, as well as what the local process for preservation may look like for your community. I will be going over some programs that I personally do not administer through HPD, but I do have a few of my HPD colleagues on the call with me. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. That way my colleagues can answer them as they come in. And if there's any questions that are just for me at the very end, I'll make sure to answer those before we close out the call. Without further ado, make sure I have the slides all pulled up. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Thank you, Beth. All right, in that case, I'll go ahead and get us started. I will try to avoid what I call going into auctioneer mode, where I basically just start talking a mile a minute. So I'll try to take us real nice and slow through everything. If I do skip over anything, or if there's anything you do have a question about, like I said, just drop in the chat. But I want to make sure that we get through the whole hour and make sure we get as much information as possible. So that being said, like I said, going over local designation as it is the main source of preservation in your community, and some of the programs that we offer that may help support that process once a area has been designated, or if you are interested in designating an area. So a little bit real quick about just who we are, HPD. So we are a division of the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. We are also known as the State Historic Preservation Office. So you may have heard us referred to as HPD, Historic Preservation Division, as well as SHPO. Same thing, just two different acronyms. Every state does have a State Historic Preservation Office. It's just certain offices fulfill those roles differently. So here in Georgia, our State Historic Preservation Office is the Historic Preservation Division of the Department of Community Affairs. We have a dedicated staff, about 25, honestly, almost ranging to 30 at this point, I think, all with backgrounds ranging from archaeology, architecture, history, historic preservation, planning, etc. We are federally funded through the National Park Service with a matching budget from the Georgia State Legislature. And the reason for that is because we administer programs that are both federal as well as state. As I said, we do carry out both federal and state mandated historic preservation activities. Some of these include things I'll be talking about today, such as the National Register and tax incentives, as well as some I won't be touching on too much today, such as Section 106 Environmental Review. I will briefly mention those, but if you have any in-depth questions, feel free to reach out after the webinar and we can go over some of those programs a little bit more in depth. We will also be providing preservation education, training, local assistance, and just as general support for preservation activities. That's one of our main roles as the State Historic Preservation Office. So carrying out webinars such as this, as well as doing other trainings, conferences, such as our statewide preservation conference that we actually just had last week. All of those are things that we do throughout the state for preservation. And that's because our mission is to promote the preservation and use of historic places for a better Georgia. And that's not just about the preservation of the properties, but also putting those properties back into use through the various programs that we administer. Now, I'm sure many of you are already aware of how beneficial preservation can be, but just in case I need to sell any of you on it, maybe if you're not quite sold on why preservation is important and why it can be a resource to your community, I do have a couple of main benefits I can go over with y'all. So one of the very first benefits, especially when it comes to local districts, like I'll be discussing today, it protects the investments and owners of both protects the investments of both owners and residents. So buyers know that aspects that make a particular area attractive will be protected over time through preservation resources and programs. Real estate agents in many cities use historic districts, both National Register and local, as a marketing tool to sell their properties. It also encourages better design, especially through the local districts where there is a design review element. It has been shown through comparative studies that there is a greater sense of relativeness, more innovative use of materials, and a greater public appeal within historic districts that designation. Additionally, preservation, it does help the environment. One of the most common phrases you'll hear preservation say is that the greenest building is the one that's been already built. Simple as that, it keeps resources out of landfills. It prevents additional deconstruction costs. It just generally is better for the environment. Additionally, there are multiple educational benefits to creating local and national register districts. All of them are essentially you're protecting things that can teach us about our past, which is both educational and entertaining. Prior to joining HPD, I was a museum educator, and I can tell you one of the biggest selling points and one of the easiest things to create tours and events around was the historic properties that were in our downtown district. So it's a great way to not only bring people in and learn about your history, but also bring them in and entertain them, so that will stay for a little bit longer. Another great benefit of preservation, especially in local districts as well as national register districts, is that it can have a very positive impact on your a very positive economic impact for tourism. A historic district that is aesthetically cohesive and well promoted can serve as the community's most important attraction and really draw in tourists from close by as well as far away. Additionally, tourists that come in for heritage sites or heritage districts tend to stay longer and spend more money on average than those not coming heritage tourism. And last but not least, it can actually enhance business recruitment potential. Companies continuously relocate communities that offer their workers higher quality of life, which is greatly enhanced by successful local preservation programs in stable historic districts. And the reason why quality of life is enhanced by those local districts as well as National Register is because local districts provide social and physiological benefits, a sense of empowerment and decisions that are made in a public forum, whether behind closed doors or without public comment, is such as that the designation process for local districts and landmarks, which I'll be going in here just a moment. But of course, one of the number one benefits of preservation, and I think the one that mostly sells all of us when it comes to why preservation is such an important aspect of community planning, is that, simply put, it helps protect our historic resources. That is going to be the biggest benefit always when it comes to having local designation, National Register, so on and so forth, is that ultimately all of this helps protect our historic resources. Now, like I said, I'll talk a little bit first about what local preservation most likely is happening in your community right now, or what you can engage right now in your community. So this is a process that is defined within the Georgia Historic Preservation Act. Now, it is enacted through local ordinances as well. So I'll be going over the language of local designation as it is defined within the Georgia Historic Preservation Act. But if you are interested in learning more about local designation for your community, please always check back in with your local ordinance. Or if you do not have a local ordinance currently in place that would allow for local designation, always make sure we do have resources online, such as a model ordinance that is based on the Georgia Historic Preservation Act, if you are interested in looking into that. So very, very quickly, I'll go over a couple of differences. And the differences I want to talk about are about the National Register and local designations. And this is where a lot of confusions come about. A lot of people assume that National Register has the same protections as local designations and vice versa. Some have the idea that local designation automatically places properties or districts on the National Register or vice versa. But there's actually quite a few differences, as National Register and local designations are completely separate processes. So National Register identifies significant districts and general planning purposes. Local designation, very much similar. However, the number one takeaway from National Register and local designation differences is that the local designation process creates a legal boundary, and it also creates a process review for any material change in appearance for property once it has been designated. So if you were to create a local district through the designation process for your historic area, it would then require a COA, certificate of appropriateness, to be reviewed anytime there's a material change in appearance. National Register districts do not have that. If a property or district is placed on the National Register and the property owner wants to make a material change in appearance to that property, it would not have to go through any sort of review process. The property owner could go forward with that change without having any sort of review in place. So there's very limited degree of protection from the National Register as opposed to local designation, which does have that review. Another big distinguishing factor through National Register and local designation is that National Register, while it does not have the same protection as local designation, it does provide property owners for more federal and state grant programs as well as tax incentives. So National Register properties or districts would be eligible for some of the tax programs I'll be talking about later on, whereas a property that is locally designated would not be eligible for those programs. Now, the good thing about National Register and local designation or local districts is that because they are completely separate programs, they're completely separate processes, you actually can layer them on top of each other. So if you have an area that you have already locally designated, nothing is stopping you from also nominating that property or that district for National Register for the National Register as well, and vice versa. If you have an area that is currently on the National Register, you can also go through the process of also locally designating that, so where you can also have that review process in place. There are quite a few communities all throughout the state that have gone through this process. One that I can think of off the top of my head quite recently that happened was the city of Douglasville. They had the Gaskin Avenue district, which was on the National Register. However, it had not been locally designated yet. So they actually did go through the process of locally designating that district. So that way, now not only is it now on the National Register and eligible for tax incentives and a few other grant programs, but also now there is a review process within that district that if there is any change in materials for the property owners, they have to go through the Historic Preservation Commission. All that being said, I'm going to go into a little bit of what exactly the local designation process is now. And the first place that we always start with local designation is essentially doing research. So survey, inventory, prior research. That is one of the powers of a Historic Preservation Commission, is that they can continuously create an inventory and do surveys of the historic resources within the community. Essentially, they're going through and figuring out which properties maybe are worth local designation. And this is important because you can't designate what you don't know is there. The other reason I bring this up is because this is also one of the programs that we can assist with. We have a database called NARGIS. I'm not going to try to sound out all the letters right now and tell you them. If Emily is in the chat right now, who is our survey coordinator, feel free to drop exactly what all of NARGIS stands for, but essentially is a database that if a survey is completed through one of our programs, whether it is through a CLG grant, a locally funded survey through one of our programs, or if it's done through the Find It program with Georgia, with UGA, they are entered into NARGIS, and those resources become a part of a larger database for the entire state. So if you ever have questions about whether what resources are in your area or what resources may be eligible for designation, whether it's National Register or local district. NARGIS is a great place to start. That is a publicly accessible database that you can find through our website. If you do not have any resources currently entered into NARGIS, you can have those entered through one of the programs that we administer, like the CLG program, or through the locally funded survey program that we have also through the CLG program. But essentially, the reason I bring this up is something that we can assist with, but also it's a great place to start if you are interested in doing either a local designation or a National Register nomination. Like I said, you have to know what's there in order to designate it. So once you have information on, what you want to do with properties, if you have information on what properties are available, what properties are currently in your area that may be eligible for designation, where exactly is the process defined to actually designate them? Once again, I'm talking about the local process, not master register. So when it comes to the local process, where is this defined? Like I said before, there is the Georgia Historic Preservation Act. This was passed in 1980. This creates a kind of skeleton structure for the entire state. It gives local municipalities certain authorities, including to the ability to establish local districts. They are given these authorities by passing a historic preservation ordinance, which basically establishes the HPC local designation process and the COA or certificate of appropriateness process. It also provides state requirements for local designation processes and defines what the state's involvement is. So our office's involvement is, which is typically providing guidance and review. Another place that you'll find the process defined is going to be your local ordinance. So like I said, the State Historic Preservation Act essentially creates the ability for communities to pass ordinances to create their historic preservation commissions and define the designation and COA processes. Now, typically, these ordinances do reflect the Georgia Historic Preservation Act. However, some needs of your communities may also require additional information, or you may define processes further in your ordinance. So if you are curious about what the local designation process is for your community, refer back to your local historic preservation ordinance rather than going straight to the Georgia Historic Preservation Act. And then finally, another place to look at if you are interested in locally designating a district or property is always look at your rules and procedures, because it's going to help you understand exactly, what are the rules and procedures for having a meeting, especially if there's an element of public participation, which if you're following your local ordinance and the Georgia Historic Preservation Act, there should be. Like I said, if you have any questions about where your local preservation or your local designation process is defined, always refer back to local historic preservation ordinance. It is your blueprint for local designation. And if you ever have questions about your ordinance, if you ever have questions about, certain processes within your ordinance, we can provide some assistance or technical assistance, but also make sure to be working within your local community as well with your planning department, your building inspector, legal counsel, so on and so forth as well. Now, when it comes to nomination of a property or district for local designation, there's a few groups that are authorized typically to do this. There it goes. So who can nominate? Your Historic Preservation Commission is always going to have the power and authority to nominate a property or district for local designation. That is one of the powers and authorities granted to them. Another group that may be eligible for nominating a property or district for local designation would be a neighborhood or a group of residents. Typically, you see this for residential communities, so neighborhoods, small suburban areas, so on and so forth. A group of merchants may also be eligible. Typically, you see this with commercial downtown districts or business districts, group of merchants that come together and really want to protect their storefronts. And then last but not least, the final group that you typically see oftenly mentioned in ordinances that can nominate a property or district for designation is the local historic society, which makes sense. They are the keepers usually of information regarding historic properties. Typically their archives are what are used for research when doing these nominations. So it makes sense that they would be one of the groups included when it comes to nominating properties or districts for designation. If you ever have questions though, as I said before, always check back with your local ordinance. If it doesn't define these groups, that doesn't mean that they cannot. But always check back to see what your local ordinance says to be for sure. Now, when it comes to the local designation process, there are some required documentation. Now, some of these these required documents are defined through the State Historic Preservation Act, as well as your local ordinances. So documents that are required for both state and local is going to be your designation report, which includes a statement of significance, which the statement of significance should be used to describe and justify the significance of historic property or district to both local government officials, such as the city council or mayor, as well as the State Historic Preservation Division, us, HPD. The report can also be used to educate local residents and the community on the proposed designation in order to gain support for the public prior to the public meeting or voting required for the designation. So essentially, the way I like to describe it is that when it comes to designation report, it's your sales pitch. It is your sales pitch for why this area or this property deserves protection. You are going to be used car salesman for a little bit, and you're going to try to sell everyone on this area, why it deserves to be protected. Now, some documents that are typically required at the local level, but not necessarily for the state, are going to be your designation ordinance and your zoning map. So a property or district will officially be designated through the adoption of a designation ordinance, which should be drafted by the Historic Preservation Commission prior to the voting by the local municipality, city council, and or mayor. Included within this designation ordinance is the zoning map, which shows the boundaries of a designated district or the location of a designated property or properties. So if your designation report and statement of significance are your sales pitch, the designation ordinance and zoning map is your sale of receipt. So you sold everyone on it, you told everyone or you convinced everyone why they should protect it. And the designation ordinance, once it is adopted, is your proof of receipt. It is saying, all right, we have it officially in writing that this area is important and deserves protection and should be preserved in the future. Now, when it comes to the designation report, these are documents that will need to be submitted to our office, the Historic Preservation Division, for review and comments at least 30 days before designation. This is something that is outlined within the Georgia Historic Preservation Act and is typically outlined within local ordinances as well. So if you are interested in locally designating a district or property, please make sure to submit the designation report to our office at least 30 days before, so that way we can provide review and comments. Now, I do want to clarify something real quick that is a very common, I wouldn't say misconception, miscommunication, which is that when we provide review and comments, that we are providing a determination on the local district. This is not true. The process of locally designating a district or property is ultimately always a local decision. So if we provide comments and it's not something that the local government necessarily agrees with, or they wish to move forward with the designation, that is ultimately the choice of the local government to move forward with. We simply are providing guidance as the preservation office for the state. So just want to clear up a little bit. Sometimes a misunderstanding that we are providing determination, but we are not. When it comes to the local process, because it is a local process, it is always determined at the local level. We are only providing review and guidance. You know, sometimes I wonder if I added too many animations. All right, now that that's cleared up, let's go back to the designation report. Speaking of the thing that I was just talking about when it comes to our review. So typically some of the information that you'll include within a designation report, and this may be some of the things that you'll include within a national registry nomination as well. District or property boundaries. So essentially, where is it? What is the place that you're trying to designate? Is it a large area? Is it a small area? What are the streets that are defined? Is it defined by streets? Is it defined by tax parcels? All things that you should include when describing the boundaries. Another thing to include when you're describing a district, especially, is what is contributing versus non-contributing properties. Now, usually I would go on a whole tangent about contributing versus non-contributing properties, just to save us some time. Very quick summary, a contributing property is typically defined as a property that is contributing to the historical significance of a district, versus a non-contributing property is a property that is not contributing to the historical significance of a district. So for example, if you have a neighborhood that was mostly constructed in the 1950s and right smack dab in the middle of it is a Walmart that was constructed in 2011, you would want to designate the entire district because you don't want any holes within it. But simply you would put that Walmart as being considered a non-contributing property because it is not contributing to the main historical significance of that district. Unless you just really, really want to designate it. That's your choice. All right. So another thing you want to include is the physical description of the area, whether it's a district or the property or an individual property. So what does it look like? What kind of architectural style is it? What kind of form is it? What are some of the character defining features? If it's an Italianate building, maybe it has the hanging eaves, the square windows. If it's a Queen Anne, it has, the gingerbreading up front, the kind of random form to it. All of this is things that you should be including within the visual description. You should also include a brief history of the area or the resource. Provide some information about when was this all constructed? What was some of the changes that occurred? What was the significance of this as well? What were some of the things happening around this area, and why it's considered historic, essentially. Which brings me to the significance of the resource or resources. So we're talking a little bit about the history. How is the resource itself significant to history? Is it a great example of a certain type of architectural style? Was